Welcome to Readings in English, where we explore the richness and beauty of the English language through captivating stories. English, a language spoken across the globe, is not just about words but a bridge to new cultures, ideas, and experiences. Whether you're just beginning your journey or looking to deepen your understanding, each story here offers an opportunity to learn and feel connected through language. Today, we dive into a heartfelt tale that embodies the challenges and joys of learning English in a foreign land. Follow Isabella, a young woman who arrives in Boston with dreams and determination, but is quickly met with the daunting reality of a language she barely understands. As she navigates her new life, she finds solace and strength in an unexpected friendship that becomes her guide in mastering the language. Through each moment of struggle and success, she discovers not only a new language, but also a new sense of self. So settle in and let's begin today's journey with Isabella's inspiring story of resilience, friendship, and growth. Isabella stepped off the bus and into the heart of Boston, her suitcase in one hand and a small bag slung over her shoulder. The city was bustling, crowds surged around her, cars honked, and people spoke so quickly that it felt like a whirlwind of sounds. She took a deep breath, but the weight in her chest didn't ease. She was far from her small hometown in Colombia, and everything here was vast, overwhelming, and, worst of all, incomprehensible. The little English she knew escaped her in the flurry of emotions that swept over her as she tried to follow the directions she had jotted down. After a few wrong turns and a couple of misunderstandings with strangers who had offered help, she finally reached the small, quaint bookstore, the Book Haven, where she'd be working. It wasn't grand or flashy, tucked in between the tall buildings, but there was a warmth to it that called to her. The bell jingled as she entered, and the scent of paper and ink hit her like a comforting embrace. She glanced around at the tall shelves lined with books in every color, size, and shape imaginable. This, at least, felt familiar. Her new boss, Margaret, a brisk but kind woman in her 50s, gave her a quick tour. As they walked through the narrow aisles, Margaret explained the basic rules of the store and pointed out her duties. Most of the conversation was a blur. Isabella nodded, pretending to understand more than she did. The fear of disappointing Margaret gnawed at her, but she pushed it down, determined to adapt. The customers who came in that day spoke to her in rapid English. She managed with polite smiles and gestures, occasionally catching a word or two. By the end of her shift, her head throbbed from trying to piece together fragments of conversations. As she left the store that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness and inadequacy. Here she was, in a country she dreamed of, yet the very thing she'd hoped for, a connection with new people, felt painfully out of reach. The next morning, Isabella arrived early, eager to prove herself. She went about her tasks quietly, shelving books, dusting, and organizing displays. Customers filtered in and out, most absorbed in their own worlds, which suited her fine. Mid-morning, as she organized a stack of newly arrived novels, she noticed an older man browsing nearby. He wore a worn tweed jacket, and his white hair gave him an air of gentle wisdom. He approached the counter, placing a stack of books in front of her. She managed to smile. "Good morning," she said, her accent thick but warm. "Good morning," he replied with a smile that reached his eyes. As she scanned the books, he commented, "I don't think I've seen you here before. Are you new?" She hesitated, her mind racing to find the right words. "Yes, I started yesterday." She hoped her response made sense. His smile grew warmer, and he nodded. It must be quite an adventure coming here from Columbia, she supplied, feeling a glimmer of relief that he seemed willing to bear with her broken English. "Columbia. Beautiful place," he said, his tone sincere. "I'm Tom, by the way. I come here every week." "I think I might have read nearly half the books in this place," he chuckled, making her smile for the first time that day. Tom's kindness and patience put her at ease. She didn't understand everything he said, but he spoke slowly, enunciating his words, as if understanding her struggle. After their brief conversation, he left with a cheerful wave, and Isabella felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way for her to feel less alone here. Later that day, as she stacked books on a lower shelf, she felt someone's presence beside her. She looked up to see Tom again, holding a small book. "You know," he began gently, "if you ever want help with English, I'd be happy to read with you. We could start with something simple." His offer stunned her. People rarely went out of their way to help strangers, and here was someone she'd met just that morning, offering kindness she hadn't expected. "Really?" she managed, her voice soft with gratitude. "Really?" he confirmed, holding out a thin book with a bright cover. It was a children's book, and she recognized a few simple words on the cover. It could be fun. They found a quiet corner of the store, and Tom opened the book, reading slowly and pointing to each word. She followed along, repeating after him, tripping over certain sounds, but he encouraged her patiently. For the first time since arriving, Isabella felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, as if she had finally found someone who saw past her language barrier and into her heart. The session ended quickly, but it had left her feeling hopeful. Tom's kindness was a reminder that she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Isabella woke the next morning feeling a sense of excitement she hadn't experienced in weeks. She had agreed to meet Tom again at the bookstore, where he promised they'd go over another simple book together. This time she arrived with a notebook and pen, determined to absorb as much as possible. When Tom arrived, he greeted her warmly, and they found their usual spot in the back of the store. He had brought along a few more books, each one slightly more complex than the last. "Let's start slow," he said, opening the first book and pointing to the title. As they read, Isabella scribbled notes, focusing on each word, its sound, and its meaning. Tom was a patient teacher, repeating words, explaining meanings, and even drawing simple illustrations to help her grasp concepts. She felt her confidence growing, and each successful pronunciation felt like a victory. Occasionally, he would share a memory or story related to a word, giving their lessons a warmth that made them more than just language practice. During a break, Tom looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when I was learning Spanish from my late wife, I felt exactly the way you do now. Every word felt like a mountain to climb." Isabella looked at him with surprise. She hadn't imagined someone like Tom would understand what it felt like to struggle with a new language. "You learned Spanish?" she asked, her voice laced with admiration. He nodded, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Yes, for love. And, to be honest, I wasn't very good at it at first, but little by little, it became easier." Language is just another way to connect with people. His words lingered in her mind, giving her hope that her own mountain might not be impossible to climb. Their session ended with Tom assigning her a few pages to read on her own. As she left that day, Isabella felt an unfamiliar sense of fulfillment, as if she was beginning to find her place in this vast, confusing city. The next day at work, Isabella's confidence wavered. As she organized books on a tall shelf, a customer approached the counter. She hurried over, hoping she'd be able to understand and assist without too much difficulty. The customer, a tall man in a business suit, spoke quickly and asked if the bookstore had a specific title. Isabella struggled to catch his words, but managed to pick out a few key words. She smiled apologetically, trying to clarify, but the man seemed impatient. After a few attempts at communication, he sighed loudly, clearly frustrated. "Is there someone else who can help?" he asked, his tone sharp. Isabella felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She opened her mouth to explain, but the words tangled. Margaret, her manager, noticed the situation and came over, deftly handling the customer's request. Isabella watched with a sinking heart, feeling every bit as inadequate as she had on her first day. Margaret, noticing her distress, put a gentle hand on her shoulder once the customer left. "It takes time, Isabella," she said softly. "We all struggle with new things. Don't be hard on yourself." But as the day wore on, the encounter gnawed at her confidence. She had worked so hard with Tom, yet this incident had made her feel as if she'd learned nothing. That evening, as she sat alone in her small apartment, Isabella replayed the customer's impatient words. The excitement and confidence she'd built with Tom seemed to dissipate, leaving her questioning if she was truly cut out for this. The next day, Isabella confided in Tom about the incident, her voice heavy with disappointment. "It felt like everything I had learned didn't matter," she admitted, her eyes downcast. Tom listened, nodding thoughtfully. Language learning It's like that one day you feel on top of the world, and the next you feel like you're starting from scratch. But it's all part of the journey. Every mistake is a step forward. His words eased her shame, and he suggested they pick up where they left off. Their reading session that day felt more intense, as if both were determined to make up for the setback. Isabella realized that Tom's encouragement was as valuable as the words they practiced. He gave her the strength to keep going, even when her confidence faltered. By the end of their session, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, she had stumbled, but she knew she wasn't alone. Tom's kindness reminded her that the journey was as important as the destination, and every step, no matter how small, was progress. With each session, Isabella began to view their reading time as more than just language practice. It became a ritual, a quiet space where she could connect with Tom and perhaps with parts of herself that she had left behind in Colombia. Every book they opened seemed to offer her not only new vocabulary, but also glimpses into human experiences that transcended language. One afternoon, Tom brought her a small collection of short stories. Today, I thought we could try something different. These stories explored different lives, places, and emotions. Maybe you'll find something that speaks to you. They began with a simple story about a young girl facing fears. Tom read the first few paragraphs aloud, and Isabella listened carefully, drawn to the story's themes of courage. As they went along, she felt herself relating to the girl's struggles, seeing fragments of her own journey mirrored in the story. Each sentence was a hurdle, but with Tom's patient guidance, she made it to the end. For the first time, she was able to express an emotion in English beyond just happy or sad. She managed to say it's inspiring, her voice filled with genuine sentiment. Tom smiled, nodding in agreement. From then on, their reading sessions took on a new dimension. Tom chose stories with different themes: love, loss, friendship, hope, and each story seemed to touch Isabella in a unique way. Through these characters and plots, she began to understand English not just as a series of words to memorize, but as a means to understand deeper emotions and experiences. It was as though these stories were teaching her to feel in a new language, showing her that English could help her express parts of herself she had never known before. By the end of the day, as she walked home, with a book tucked under her arm, Isabella felt a surge of gratitude. Tom's choice of stories had shown her that she was not only learning a language, but also discovering new ways to see the world. With each story, her heart opened a little more, and the walls of loneliness she had built around herself began to crumble. Encouraged by their progress, Tom suggested that they move on to some English literature classics. They might be challenging, he warned, but I think you're ready for it, and who knows? You might find a favorite author. He handed her a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and gave her a brief summary of the plot. Isabella was intrigued by the themes of justice and empathy and agreed to give it a try. Over the next few days, she read slowly, often pausing to ask Tom questions about difficult phrases and cultural nuances. Tom explained patiently not just the language, but the historical and social context that made the story meaningful. As she read, Isabella noticed something remarkable. For the first time, she found herself forming opinions in English. She began to discuss the characters with Tom, pointing out details that resonated with her own experiences. The way Atticus Finch stood up for justice reminded her of her father, a man of principles who had always taught her to value kindness and integrity. Their discussions became animated, with Tom encouraging her to think critically and express herself more freely. At times, he would challenge her views, pushing her to defend her thoughts in English. This new layer to their sessions made Isabella feel as though she was unlocking a different part of herself, a voice that was stronger, more articulate, and less afraid. Through these classics, Isabella also began to see how language could carry complex ideas, values, and emotions. She saw the universality of themes like family, justice, and resilience. These stories made her feel more connected to her surroundings, as if each page was weaving her life in Boston, with the lives she read about blurring the boundaries between them. One evening, after an intense discussion about the book, Isabella felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not only had she understood the story, but she had also connected with it on a level she hadn't thought possible. As she closed the book, she realized that she was no longer just an outsider learning English. She was part of a world of literature that welcomed her into its stories and gave her a voice. The language was becoming her own, one word, one sentence, one book at a time. As winter settled over Boston, Isabella found herself struggling more than ever with homesickness. She missed her family, the familiar sounds of Spanish, the warmth of her town, and the vibrant energy of Columbia. Although Tom's lessons and the stories she read offered comfort, a persistent question loomed in her mind. Was all of this worth it? One evening, after a particularly long shift at the bookstore, Isabella returned to her small apartment and sat by her window, watching snowflakes drift down under the dim city lights. She felt an ache inside, a sense of distance that couldn't be bridged by any amount of reading or conversation. The thought of returning home crossed her mind more often now, and each time it was harder to dismiss. The next day, during her reading session with Tom, she finally opened up about her doubts. "I think maybe I should go back to Columbia," she confessed, struggling to hold back tears. "I miss my family. It's so hard here." Tom listened in silence, giving her the space to voice her feelings. When she finished, he took a deep breath. "I won't pretend to know what you're feeling," he said gently, "but I do know what it's like to feel far from home. When I lost my wife, it was like my whole world became unfamiliar, and everything I'd known felt distant. Isabella looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. He continued, "What helped me through that was connecting with people, finding new ways to keep her memory alive. Sometimes the things we love most feel far away, but it doesn't mean we should give up on them. Your family, your home, they'll always be part of you, no matter where you go." His words resonated with her. She realized that her journey in Boston wasn't just about learning English. It was about finding parts of herself she hadn't known before. She thanked Tom for his understanding, and he suggested they continue reading together, using the stories as a way to stay grounded. That night, as Isabella sat in her apartment, once more, the idea of returning home still lingered, but it no longer felt like the only option. She knew she could carry her family with her through the lessons she'd learned and the memories she cherished. Her choice to stay was still uncertain, but the possibility of continuing her journey in Boston now felt a little more manageable. With a renewed sense of purpose, Isabella approached her language studies with fresh determination. She decided to challenge herself further by picking up a more complex book, Pride and Prejudice. Although daunting, she felt ready to push her boundaries. Each page was a struggle, but she found herself captivated by Elizabeth Bennet's wit and resilience. The characters' dilemmas, though set in another era, resonated with her own feelings of self-doubt and courage. Her sessions with Tom became more intense as they dissected the book, one sentence at a time. Every unfamiliar word or cultural reference became a new mountain to climb, but Tom's steady encouragement kept her motivated. Slowly, she grew more comfortable not only with the language, but with the idea that she could embrace the challenge instead of fearing it. Outside of their sessions, Isabella began applying her language skills more confidently at the bookstore. She struck up small conversations with customers, asking them about the books they chose, and even managed to recommend a few titles herself. Each interaction, no matter how small, became an opportunity to practice her English and connect with the people around her. One afternoon, a customer noticed her struggling with a particularly dense book and offered to help her. They chatted about the book's themes, and for the first time, Isabella felt a sense of belonging that went beyond words. She wasn't just a foreigner learning English, she was part of the bookstore's little community, finding her own place among the shelves and the stories. That evening, as she walked home, Isabella realized that each small victory was building toward something larger. Her choice to stay and her determination to learn had opened new doors, not only to understanding a language, but to finding her voice in a foreign world. For the first time, she felt proud of how far she'd come, and the once daunting road ahead seemed a little less lonely. As her English improved, Isabella's responsibilities at the bookstore increased. Margaret, noticing her progress, began to rely on her for more tasks that involved direct interaction with customers. Isabella felt proud, but also anxious, fearing that each new responsibility brought her closer to potential mistakes. The pressure began to weigh on her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that one misstep might erase all the progress she'd made. One busy afternoon, Margaret tasked Isabella to handle a group of customers who were browsing for gifts. They asked for recommendations and detailed descriptions, wanting to find something special for their family members. Isabella did her best to help, describing the books and attempting to convey their themes, but halfway through, she stumbled over her words. Her explanations felt clumsy, and as the customers exchanged uncertain glances, her heart sank. She feared that she'd let Margaret down and felt the sting of self-doubt creeping back. Afterward, Margaret approached her, sensing her distress. "You're doing wonderfully, Isabella," she reassured her. "Everyone struggles sometimes, even those of us who've been here for years." Despite Margaret's kind words, Isabella couldn't help but feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her. She wanted to prove herself, to show that she could belong here, but the pressure seemed to grow with each new challenge. That evening, as she shared her frustrations with Tom, he listened attentively. "Isabella," he said gently, "it's natural to feel burdened when we want to do our best. But remember, the purpose of learning isn't just to avoid mistakes, it's about growth. Every challenge you face is another step forward, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment." Tom's words gave her comfort, but the doubts lingered. She realized that the journey she had embarked on required resilience beyond her initial expectations, and though it was difficult, she resolved to keep pushing through. Isabella's determination to improve only grew after her conversation with Tom. She began to approach her language practice with a new mindset, viewing each mistake not as a failure, but as an opportunity to learn. This shift in perspective allowed her to start expressing herself with a little more confidence, and she began to experiment with new phrases and ideas. One afternoon, a customer came in looking for a recommendation for a book on travel and culture. This time, Isabella felt the spark of excitement rather than fear. She led the customer to a selection of books and shared her thoughts on each one, discussing the themes and even mentioning some personal connections to certain stories. The customer listened intently, and by the end of their conversation, she realized she had spoken entirely in English without stumbling or hesitating. The experience left her beaming. The fear that had once shadowed her interactions was beginning to lift, replaced by a sense of joy in communicating and connecting with others. She felt as if she was finally finding her voice, one that had been buried beneath layers of self-doubt and language barriers. The transformation was subtle but powerful, marking a new stage in her journey. That evening, she shared her success with Tom, who congratulated her with a proud smile. "I knew you had it in you," he said, "and I think you're just getting started." There's a whole world of words and expressions waiting for you to discover. His words filled her with hope, and as she walked home, Isabella felt the city around her come alive in a new way. She was no longer an outsider observing from the edges. She was part of the rhythm, the energy, and the language of this world. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, a realization that her journey was leading her toward a deeper connection, not only with the city, but also with herself. As winter began to give way to the early whispers of spring, Margaret announced an upcoming event, a book club gathering hosted by the Book Haven. The store would hold a discussion on classic literature, inviting regulars and new customers alike. Margaret, sensing Isabella's progress, suggested she join the event and even encouraged her to present a short introduction to one of the featured books. At first, Isabella's heart raced at the idea. Speaking to customers one-on-one was one thing, but standing before a group and speaking in English felt daunting. She wanted to say no, to excuse herself, but Margaret's belief in her and the support she'd found with Tom pushed her to accept the challenge. Over the following days, Isabella and Tom prepared tirelessly. She chose Pride and Prejudice as her topic, feeling a deep connection with Elizabeth Bennet's journey of self-discovery. They worked on pronunciation, pacing, and ways to express her insights confidently. Tom encouraged her every step of the way, reminding her that she was more than capable of sharing her voice. The night of the event arrived, and Isabella felt her nerves surging. As she stood in front of the small group gathered in the store, she glanced at Tom, who gave her a nod of encouragement from the back of the room. Taking a deep breath, she began her presentation, her voice trembling slightly at first. She spoke about the themes of independence and resilience, drawing connections between Elizabeth's journey and her own. To her surprise, the words flowed, each sentence growing more natural as she let her passion for the story guide her. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. Margaret smiled warmly, and Tom looked at her with unmistakable pride. For the first time, Isabella felt not only proud of her English skills, but of the courage it had taken to share her thoughts so openly. The applause wasn't just for her words, it was for the journey that had brought her here. From the nervous girl who had first stepped into the store to the confident young woman standing before them. After the event, Isabella's confidence blossomed. Her interactions with customers became more engaging, and she began taking on more responsibilities at the bookstore with ease. The experience of the presentation had shown her that language was not a barrier, but a bridge, connecting her to others in ways she hadn't imagined. One afternoon, as she and Tom reflected on how far she had come, he handed her a blank notebook. "You know," he said with a gentle smile, "you have quite a story of your own to tell. Maybe you should start writing it." At first, Isabella hesitated, unsure if her journey was worth sharing. But the idea lingered, growing each time she thought about the path she'd traveled from her hometown in Columbia to a bookstore in Boston, from isolation to belonging. She realized that the language she had once struggled with had not only helped her adapt, but had become a means to understand herself and her place in the world. With Tom's encouragement, she began to fill the notebook with her experiences, her feelings, and the lessons she had learned. Each word she wrote felt like a testament to her resilience, capturing the quiet victories, the doubts, and the moments of growth that had defined her journey. The stories she wrote were simple yet meaningful, chronicling the friendships she had formed, the fears she had faced, and the sense of purpose she had found along the way. She imagined sharing these stories with others who, like her, had left behind familiar worlds to chase dreams in foreign lands. As she filled the last page of the notebook, Isabella felt a profound sense of closure. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew that she was ready for whatever lay ahead. With her newfound confidence, her voice, and her story, she looked to the future with hope, knowing that she had finally found her place in a world that had once felt so distant. The book she had written became a reminder of the power of resilience, friendship, and the courage to grow. And in that small notebook, she held a piece of herself, forever capturing the journey that had brought her from isolation to belonging, from silence to expression, from dreams to reality. A few weeks after completing her notebook, Isabella sat with Margaret and Tom in the cozy corner of the book haven, recounting some of her favorite moments from her journey. As she shared her stories with them, Margaret proposed an idea that left her both surprised and deeply touched. "You know, Isabella," Margaret began thoughtfully, "these stories you've written, I think they're worth sharing with a wider audience. Why don't we make a small display here at the store? A little section where customers can read your journey and perhaps even find their own inspiration in it." The idea filled Isabella with a blend of excitement and nervousness. The thought of others reading her words and experiencing her story felt both vulnerable and empowering. She agreed, and over the next few days, they printed copies of her writings and arranged them in a modest display by the entrance, titled "A Journey Through Words." To her astonishment, the display drew attention. Customers stopped to read her story, and some even approached her to share their own experiences. A few shared how they, too, had moved to Boston from distant places, facing similar struggles of adapting to a new language and culture. Others simply expressed admiration for her resilience, touched by the honesty and vulnerability of her journey. The small display became a bridge not only between Isabella and the customers, but between people from diverse backgrounds, each finding something familiar in her words. She realized that, in sharing her story, she had managed to connect with others in a way she had once thought impossible. One evening, as she was closing the store, Tom approached her with a soft smile. I think you've found something special, Isabella. Not everyone has the courage to share their journey, to make themselves known like you have. It's a gift not just for you, but for everyone who reads it. She thanked him, deeply moved, knowing that his unwavering support had been one of the anchors that kept her steady through it all. Her journey in Boston had been filled with moments of doubt and fear, but each step had brought her closer to a place of belonging. The language she had once feared was now her own, a means to connect, to express, and to build a life she cherished. As the days turned to months, Isabella's stories continued to touch others, and she felt a profound sense of purpose in sharing her voice. She knew that her path was just beginning, with endless possibilities waiting in this new chapter of her life. She had found a home not just in the language, but in the connections it had brought her, the friendships she had formed, and the quiet strength she had uncovered within herself. And so, with each word she shared and every story she wrote, Isabella embraced her newfound life, confident that no matter where the journey took her next, she had finally found her voice in a world that had once seemed so far away.